She walked in wearing nothing but courage. No designer label, no last name that rang through Forbes circles. Just a quiet presence, a dress she stitched herself, and 1,000 eyes that didn't know whether to laugh or look away. In a ballroom built for power, she was the glitch, the outsider, the mistake someone whispered too loudly about. But what no one knew, what not even she knew, was that within the next few hours, the woman they mocked would own the very room that tried to erase her, and history would never forget her name. The envelope was cream-colored, thick and expensive to the touch, like something meant for another world. Ella stared at it on the chipped kitchen table of her tiny one-bedroom apartment, hands still dusted with flour from her morning shift at the bakery. The calligraphy spelled her name perfectly, elegantly, almost mockingly, Miss Ella Lane. She had half a mind to toss it in the trash. What would she be doing at a gala wedding held at the Sterling Pavilion, one of the most exclusive venues in the state? She wasn't related to the couple, wasn't rich, and didn't even own a dress that would pass the doorman's eye. But something inside her, curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe just the echo of a name she hadn't heard in months, urged her to open it. The card inside was even more ornate. She was warmly invited to the union of Savannah Carrington and Thomas Wynne, two names she recognized from tabloids and whispers behind polished glass counters. A high society marriage. Champagne fountains, designer gowns, fake smiles, and people who wouldn't even know how to pronounce her last name if it wasn't already printed for them. She almost declined. She should have declined. But there was a signature at the bottom of the card, handwritten in a different ink. No name, just a symbol. A single elegant L. Her fingers froze. Only one person ever signed with just an L. And he hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the courthouse, not since their silent vows, their secret, not since the day he promised that when the world was ready, he would come for her, and make sure no one could ever look down on her again. But he had vanished like smoke. No calls, no letters, not even a whisper. Until now. Ella packed the invitation in her bag, took one deep breath, and whispered to no one but herself, "Let them look." She didn't have a gown, didn't have jewelry, and didn't even own a car, but she had a dress her grandmother once made, a pair of worn heels, and a spine that had weathered worse storms than social stairs. When the day arrived, she got off the bus 2 blocks from the venue. The streets were lined with black SUVs, valets in white gloves, and paparazzi flashing at guests in backless diamonds and sculpted tuxedos. She kept her eyes low and walked. Every step closer to the front gate felt like trespassing. She reached the entrance just as a woman in red turned and looked her up and down. "Are you staff?" she asked, with a polite venom that only old money knew how to deliver. Ella smiled softly. "No, just a guest." The woman blinked, then chuckled. "Of course you are." She turned away, not waiting for Ella's name. Inside the golden halls, Ella moved like a ghost among gods, unseen, unwelcome, but there. And she was about to find out why. The Sterling Pavilion shimmered like a jewel box cracked open. Everything gleamed too brightly, too perfectly, like a set designed for people who'd never had to sweep a floor or skip a meal. Crystal chandeliers dripped like melting ice above crowds of men in bespoke suits, and women in dresses worth more than Ella's annual income. The air smelled like money and judgment. As Ella stepped across the marble floor, heels echoing like confessions, heads turned. It was subtle at first, a glance over a champagne flute, a double take from a pair of sharply painted eyes, but within minutes, the whispers rippled like oil on water. "Who is she? Did someone let the help wander in? That dress, vintage or thrift? God, look at those shoes. Did she walk here?" A waiter passed by and instinctively offered her a tray of hors d'oeuvres, but someone grabbed his sleeve and hissed, "She's not one of us." He blinked, confused, then walked away without offering anything. Ella didn't flinch. She had expected this. Hell, she'd lived it in smaller ways her whole life. In school hallways, in job interviews, in waiting rooms where she was invisible until someone needed a favor. She kept moving. But then came the accident. If it even was one. A woman in a backless emerald gown brushed past her with exaggerated carelessness, sloshing her full glass of red wine down Ella's shoulder. "Oh," she gasped with mock sweetness, eyes wide with performative concern. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you standing there." Someone snorted behind her. Another added, "She should have worn something waterproof anyway." Laughter bubbled. Ella stood frozen, the wine seeping into her grandmother's handmade dress like blood. She met the woman's gaze for a moment. "It's okay," she said quietly, and walked to the restroom without waiting for help. Inside, she locked the door, leaned against the sink, and took one slow, deliberate breath. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but unbroken. She took a piece of tissue and dabbed the wine without panic. It wouldn't come out, not fully. But that wasn't the point. The point was that they had tried to humiliate her, and failed. When she returned to the ballroom, the music had changed. The bride was about to arrive. Guests were lining the aisle, murmuring about the spectacle to come. And somewhere across the room, a man in a dark suit with a scar above his collarbone watched her quietly. He didn't speak. Not yet. But the air shifted the moment he did. The music softened as the grand entrance doors creaked open, signaling the bride's descent down the ivory aisle. Every guest turned instinctively toward the staircase, gasping at Savannah Carrington in her shimmering white gown, lace flown in from Italy, a train carried by two flower girls with perfectly curled hair, and a veil like frost spun into fabric. She smiled with grace that had been rehearsed in mirrors since childhood, radiating the confidence of a woman born to be celebrated. But not everyone was looking at her. Near the front, flanked by business titans and socialites, sat a group of sharp-eyed men in dark suits, executives from Wynn Enterprises. Among them, a man with silver at his temples and an expression carved from granite kept glancing toward the back of the room. He wasn't watching the bride. He was watching Ella. "Who is that?" he murmured to the assistant beside him. The younger man, nervous, checked his tablet. "No name on the official guest list. She wasn't part of the RSVPs, sir." "She's not staff either," the older man said, narrowing his eyes. Too still, too calm. "But she doesn't belong here." In another corner, a woman in pearls whispered to her husband. "She looks familiar, doesn't she? Like someone I've seen in old photos." "Maybe she's someone's cousin," he replied, "or someone's mistake." Meanwhile, Ella stood in the back, alone, wine-stained and unwavering. Her eyes weren't on the bride either. She was scanning the crowd, looking for someone. She didn't know what she expected, a nod, a signal, even a smile. But all she found was more eyes that didn't understand her place here, or pretended not to, until she caught a glimpse of him. At the far end of the ballroom, partially hidden behind the edge of a tall floral arrangement, stood a man with a profile she'd memorized in silence. Broad-shouldered, jet-black suit. No one was near him, yet no one dared to approach. Leo. Her heart stuttered. He didn't move, didn't blink. But he saw her. Their eyes locked just as Savannah reached the altar and turned to greet her groom. But something was wrong. The officiant looked uncertain. The man standing opposite the bride wasn't the one she expected, and a murmur ran through the crowd. Because the real groom was no longer standing at the front. He was walking, slowly, deliberately, toward the back of the room, toward the girl in the stained dress. The room had frozen in time. Savannah's smile wavered, faltered, and disappeared altogether as Leo kept walking, his gaze fixed only on Ella. She didn't move, didn't blink, her breath caught between disbelief and 100 unanswered questions. The music had faded, replaced by hushed murmurs like waves rising before a storm. What is he doing? Is this part of the ceremony? Isn't that the CEO of Arden Group? The guests shifted in confusion, but none dared to step in his path. Not when it was Leo Arden, powerful, cold, precise. The man who built empires by speaking softly and being feared anyway. When he reached Ella, he didn't say a word. He simply held out his hand. The wine-stained girl, the mocked intruder, looked at him with the quiet defiance of someone who had been burned so many times that fire no longer scared her. For a long second, she didn't take it. And that silence was louder than any gasp. Savannah's father stood up abruptly, face red, voice trembling. "Leo, what is the meaning of this? You're embarrassing my daughter." Leo turned his head slightly, voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Your daughter was never going to be my wife." The words cracked like thunder. Savannah choked on a sob, mascara beginning to bleed. The crowd stirred with a collective inhale, waiting for Leo to explain, to soften, to excuse. But he didn't. Instead, he turned back to Ella and whispered only loud enough for her to hear, "I told you I'd come back. I never break a promise." Ella's hand trembled as it rose, not from hesitation, but from the weight of every moment she had endured waiting for this one. And when her fingers touched his, the ballroom erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in panic, confusion, indignation. Savannah ran from the altar, the orchestra stopped playing, and in the middle of the chaos, Leo pulled Ella close and said with a calm only he could possess, "You don't have to say anything. Just let them see what real grace looks like." She nodded, not smiling, but standing straighter than ever before. The silent storm had arrived, and no one in that room would ever forget how quietly it began. Silence turned into chaos. Guests stood, some reaching for their phones, others demanding answers from staff who had none. The mother of the bride nearly fainted into her chair, while the wedding planner frantically whispered into her earpiece, demanding to know why the real groom had walked away from the altar. But Leo didn't flinch. He led Ella by the hand, past velvet chairs and gasping mouths, toward the center of the grand ballroom. Her stained dress trailed behind like a flag of quiet rebellion. "Leo!" someone hissed from behind the podium. "You can't just walk away from a Carrington wedding." He turned slowly, his voice carrying without effort. "Watch me." And then, as if on cue, the double doors of the ballroom burst open once more. This time, not for a bride or a groom, but for a procession of black-suited men and women, all wearing silver pins in the shape of the Arden crest. The crowd parted as if the air itself had shifted. The head of PR, the lead legal counsel, the board secretary, even the vice president of operations. They walked in solemn, commanding, flanking one figure at the center, a silver-haired man with a black cane, a scarred left cheek, and a ring on his finger shaped like the letter A. Gasps rippled again. "Is that? It can't be. That's Richard Arden. He hasn't been seen in public in over a decade." The founding patriarch of the Arden dynasty, Leo's father, a legend whispered about in boardrooms and headlines. He nodded to Leo with a faint smile and then turned his eyes to Ella, assessing her in a single glance, not with disdain, but something else, recognition. He stepped forward and addressed the room without a microphone, but no one needed one. "Some of you came here today for a spectacle. You got one. Some of you came for power. You're in the wrong room. And some of you..." His eyes drifted to Ella. "Will have to relearn what class really means." He extended a hand toward her. "Welcome to the Arden family, my dear." Ella stood frozen, stunned not just by the gesture, but by the weight of history it carried. Leo leaned in and whispered, "I told you one day they would know who you really are, and that day is now." Around them, reporters began to take photos. PR managers ushered away the original bride's family. The DJ shut off the wedding playlist. And standing in the middle of it all, wine-stained but radiant, Ella smiled for the first time that night. Not because she had won anything, but because she had nothing left to hide. The billionaire hadn't just arrived. He had come for her. They said nothing more. They didn't need to. Richard Arden's presence alone had shattered the illusion that this was merely a social wedding gone awkward. It was now something else entirely, an unveiling, a reckoning. Savannah's father stood frozen at the altar, cheeks pale, lips quivering with words he couldn't form. A moment ago, he was set to become in-law to the most powerful family in the country. Now, he was just a man holding a canceled contract dressed in designer shame. His daughter was nowhere to be found. Ella stood quietly beside Leo, her posture no longer guarded but composed, like a flame that had stopped flickering and decided to burn. The crowd had thinned, the opportunists had retreated. The ones who remained now looked at her, not with mockery, but confusion. Because for the first time, they realized she wasn't just someone. She was something they couldn't categorize. The girl in the handmade dress was suddenly the centerpiece of the most powerful family's legacy. And still, she hadn't spoken a word. A woman approached. Marissa Lane, head of a rival corporation, is known for her brutal boardroom tactics. "Miss," she said hesitantly, "I want to apologize for earlier. I didn't realize who you were." Ella tilted her head. "And who did you think I was?" The woman fumbled. "I mean, someone not from around here." "You were right," Ella said softly. "I wasn't." Then she turned to Leo. "Can we go now?" He smiled. "Yes, let's go home." But as they began to leave, another voice rose from behind them. It was Savannah, her veil now twisted around her wrist, makeup smudged, eyes hollowed with fury. "You planned this," she spat, pointing at Leo. "You humiliated me in front of the world." Leo didn't respond, but Richard did. "You humiliated yourself the moment you looked at someone's clothes and thought it defined their worth." Savannah's lips trembled. "She doesn't belong with you." Ella turned fully now, voice calm and searing. "No, I didn't belong in your circle. I belonged in his life." The hush that followed was broken only by the sound of glass shattering. Someone had dropped a champagne flute, or perhaps it was the sound of egos crumbling under truth. Because nothing in that grand hall would ever be the same after tonight. Not the guests, not the Arden name, and certainly not Ella. They didn't return to the Arden estate that night. Instead, Leo took Ella somewhere far quieter. A rooftop garden atop the original Arden building downtown, where the city lights shimmered like spilled stars and the noise below felt miles away. The air was cold but gentle. Ella leaned on the stone railing, the wind brushing strands of hair across her face as she looked out over the skyline, wine-stained fabric still clinging to her shoulder. "When did you know?" she asked softly, not turning to him. "That night at the shelter," Leo replied. "You were sorting donations, remember? Someone brought in a broken suitcase and everyone ignored it. You took the time to fix the zipper. You didn't even know it belonged to me." Ella exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought you were just another lost case, a man avoiding himself." "I was," he admitted. "But then you showed me what it looked like to care without calculation. You didn't ask for my name. You just asked if I was okay." Ella turned toward him now, eyes searching his face for lies she didn't find. "Why didn't you tell me then?" "Because you would have treated me differently. Or maybe I was afraid you wouldn't." He stepped closer. "I needed to know who would see the man, not the money." She lowered her gaze. "And what did you see in me?" He smiled. "The woman who didn't need a crown to be a queen." There was silence for a moment, not empty but heavy, full of all the things they had both left unsaid for too long. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a crumpled note, aged at the edges. "You gave this to me the day we first met, told me to keep it, even if I lost everything else." Ella took it from his hand, unfolding it slowly. Her own handwriting stared back at her. "You matter, even if the world doesn't see it yet." Her breath caught. She had forgotten those words. He hadn't. "I kept it in my wallet," he said. "Through every board meeting, every merger, every lonely night. It reminded me that someone once saw worth in me when I didn't." Her eyes burned now, but the tears didn't fall, not yet. He took her hands in his. "Ella, I never wanted a fairy tale. I wanted the truth, and you gave me that, even when I didn't deserve it." She looked up, voice trembling. "What now?" "Now," Leo said, kneeling on one knee with nothing theatrical. No crowd, no cameras, just sincerity etched into every word. "I keep my vow. The one I made silently the day you looked at me without judgment. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that your kindness changed everything?" Ella covered her mouth, laughter and tears battling in her chest. "I thought you were lost," she said. "Turns out I was just waiting." And when she whispered yes, the city didn't cheer, but the stars above blinked brighter. 1 month later, the world had changed. Or maybe it was just finally seeing clearly. Ella stood before the board of the Arden Foundation, no longer in a wine-stained dress, but in a navy blue pantsuit that fit like armor and moved like silk. Around the oval table sat men and women who once questioned her existence, now listening intently as she presented a plan that would shift not just policy, but purpose. "We have billions sitting in idle assets," she said, pointing toward the screen, "while communities drown in neglect. It's time Arden stands for more than profit. It's time we lead with empathy." Her voice was calm, sure, but not hardened. It wasn't power that spoke, it was clarity. Richard Arden, seated at the head of the table, smiled without interrupting. He knew he had built the empire, but now he was watching the soul being restored to it. After the meeting, Leo caught up with her in the hallway, leaning casually against the glass wall. "You made 3 of them tear up," he said, amused. Ella smiled. "Good. Maybe now they'll remember what humanity looks like." He took her hand as they walked toward the elevator, fingers brushing, a rhythm unspoken. Outside, the press still waited. Her story had become a global symbol, from mocked guest to matriarch of the Arden legacy. But Ella had never cared for headlines. She cared about the girls in shelters who now had scholarships, the mothers who received health care, the forgotten who now felt remembered. In one gala, she had been humiliated. In one moment, she had rewritten what legacy looked like, and now she was building something no headline could capture. That night, as Leo poured her a glass of wine in the rooftop garden where it all began, she looked out again over the city, the wind softer this time, and said, "Do you ever feel like we were meant to break first? So we'd know how to build differently?" Leo wrapped an arm around her waist. "I think you were meant to remind this world that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from how we treat those without it." She leaned into him. "Then let's never forget where we started." "Never," he whispered. In a world obsessed with status, Ella hadn't just married a billionaire. She'd taught one. And all those watching, that true wealth was the power to lift others without needing to be lifted first. And as the stars blinked again above them, the city finally bowed, not to fortune, but to the woman who turned a moment of shame into a movement of grace. The ballroom was different this time. Same chandeliers, same marble floors, same gold-trimmed archways. But the energy had changed. No longer was it a cage of whispers and judgment. Tonight, it was transformed into a sanctuary of light and truth. The Arden Foundation's anniversary gala was underway, and Ella, now Mrs. Ella Arden, had chosen this very venue. The same one where she had once been humiliated, to host the biggest charity event of the year. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. She walked in hand with Leo. No red carpet, no dramatic fanfare, yet every head turned. This time not out of curiosity or confusion, but respect. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence silenced the room. There, in the corner, Savannah stood stiffly in a silver gown, invited as a formality, her eyes avoiding Ella's. She had faded from society pages, her family's business hanging by a thread after failed partnerships. And across from her, Ella, graceful, radiant, powerful. Not because she wore a crown, but because she didn't need one. The auction began, raising millions for causes that Ella had championed. Scholarships, shelters, and medical access. Not once did she mention herself. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped to the podium, the same spot where months ago a wedding had crumbled. She looked out over the sea of faces. "Some of you knew me once as the girl in the wrong dress," she began, her voice soft but unshakable. "Some of you saw me as a mistake, a disruption, a nobody. I don't blame you. We've all been taught to judge books by their covers. But I ask you tonight, what if the covers you dismissed were the only ones that held the truth?" The room was silent. I was pushed aside not because I was wrong, but because I didn't look like I belonged. But belonging is not about fashion or bloodlines. It's about courage and love and kindness when it's least deserved. She stepped down without applause, and yet, moments later, the entire room stood in ovation, not for performance, but for integrity. Afterward, a young girl approached her with tearful eyes. "Miss Ella, you made me believe I can be something too." Ella bent down, smiled, and said, "You already are." As the night drew to a close, Leo pulled her close beneath the chandeliers. "You turned this place into something holy," he said. She laughed lightly. "No, I just stopped letting it be haunted." And with that, they danced. Not to impress, not to prove, but to celebrate a story rewritten not by wealth or revenge, but by grace that stood when everything else tried to make it fall. The ballroom would never forget that night, because the girl they once tried to erase had become the woman history would remember. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need revenge. She only needed to stand. And the world, for once, listened. The girl they dismissed became the face of the legacy. The woman they tried to humiliate became the name etched in every headline, and those who laughed now whispered in shame. But Ella Arden didn't rise to crush anyone. She rose to lift. She turned insult into invitation, pain into purpose, and silence into a platform. And in that final dance under crystal chandeliers, we didn't just witness a love story. We watched a woman rewrite what power truly looks like: dignity, grace, and the kind of strength you can't buy with a last name. So next time you're tempted to judge someone by how they look, remember her and ask yourself, what if you're staring at a queen without her crown?